Welcome back to episode 4 of Making Insight. On this episode, I'm joined by my good friend, Nicole Diehl, to explore the aspects of personal and professional development. We get to discuss the importance of a growth mindset, the role of leadership in fostering psychological safety, and the emotional barriers that individuals face in both personal and professional settings. Our conversation also delves into decision-making processes, the impact of social media on emotional expression, and the nuances of communication across generations. We touch on personality tests and astrological signs, followed by an overall emphasis on the significance of self-awareness and the need to embrace all emotions as a part of this human experience. I hope you enjoy. Let's jump right in. Welcome to episode 4 of Making Insight. This episode is a big deal because I have Nicole Diehl with me here, and we're just going to rip, right? That's what we talk about. We're just going to rip. We have some questions that we think are thought-provoking for both of us, and we think other people may be interested in as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Nicole real quickly to let her introduce herself and explain anything she would like about why she's a big deal.
Thanks, Clayton. You first get asked the question of like, what do you do for work? And I'll tell you what I do for work, but I'll also tell you like who I am as a person, because I think that's very important to speak to you as the person, not just the professional. But I'll say professionally, some people develop software, I develop people. So that headline speaks a lot because I work at a startup where we wear a lot of different hats in the people development space. So I'm a consultant, I'm a coach, I'm a designer, I'm a facilitator, but all of that comes back around to this desire and passion to just develop people and meet them where they're at. So, what personal development looks like for you might look different for somebody else. But I love what I get to do for work is bring and blend like the human personal development side of being and the professional side. So a lot of the work we do is just help people holistically be better people at work and at home. So that's my headline for what I do.
Do you do that? So you do that more at an organizational level, correct?
Yes. I'll say in a formal setting I do, but I also just as a person outside of the work hours, I just have like this, I don't know, that's like where my mind goes. It's just how can I help this person? What are they maybe missing or could you support in, which is a tricky thing because sometimes people don't want to change. Sometimes people don't want help. So there's a lot like going on up here. I have like this inner leader who wants to just keep helping everybody, but then I have to like pump the brakes because people sometimes just want to live and just do what they're doing. And that's okay too.
Of course. I love this because there seems to be a theme developing for Making Insight. All 3 guests prior to you help people in some way as well. So you're the 4th, and you all have unique characteristics that are creating change for others in a very positive way. So I hope to explore that more on this episode.
Yeah. Did you have any other Chicagoans on the line?
No Chicagoans. I had a Clevelander and 2 people from Las Vegas, one native Las Vegas, and then the last one was originally from New York. Okay. But we have 2 native Clevelanders here on this podcast. You did mention that you're in Chicago, but you're originally from Cleveland. How do you like Chicago? How do you like Chicago, and what do you think is keeping you there?
Good question. I love Chicago. It's kind of wild. In 7 days, I'll hit my 5-year mark from being here. And,
Crazy.
As you get older, they say time flies and all of that. And I'm like, shit, they're kind of right. It's like 5 years in a new city. But, considering the pandemic kind of cut off your traditional 2-ish years, right? So I feel like I've really only experienced Chicago for maybe 3, but I love it. I love public transportation, which is a hot take, but I love like being able to travel via bicycle, the bus, the train. The public transportation here is awesome.
How about walking?
Being by the lake, walking too. A whole bunch of walking is being done. Yeah. The lake is great. The weather is comparable to Cleveland. So when people are like, oh, the winters are unbearable, it doesn't faze me because we're used to this. So it's very similar to Cleveland. And the food scene, amazing. Social, and just a lot of active people. Like I love surrounding myself with people who have this desire to just be in like a better physical fit. So it's just, there's a lot of movement. There's a lot going on here, and I really like being in the center of it.
And you work for a company called Thaudium, correct?
Sure do.
How long have you been with them, and what is that company like?
Yeah. A little over 2 years. So what's exciting is, for probably most people who will be listening to this, they don't know that before I worked at this startup consulting firm, I was with the government. So I went from like federal government, one of thousands, and now I was hired 2 years ago to work at this, we'll call it a boutique consulting firm. I was the 8th employee, and now we're at 19. So we've grown a lot. Businesses better than ever. We have such passionate and bright individuals on the team. I've never felt more close to the people that I work with in like a person to person sort of dynamic. Like, we're all great at what we do in our different trades, but we all also know a lot about each other as just individuals, which is awesome. So we have a very strong culture here based on, us being people before professionals, great feedback culture, vulnerability. We all recognize we can't be everything. So we can lean on each other for certain strengths and then learn from other people's strengths if that's maybe a growth area of ours. Or maybe it's something like we don't really want to learn about. Like, there's probably someone who can do it and we can maybe get a little insight from them. But it's cool. We don't have silos, but we have a lot of thought partnership and a lot of different like project teams that kind of come together and design and deliver meaningful experiences.
Sounds fun. Sounds really engaging and intellectually stimulating. Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like also all of you are good at what you do, but also figuring out a lot of things as you go.
You hit the nail on the head. We are figuring out a lot as we go. I'd say what helps us do that is an active dialogue about it. Like, for example, we're hybrid and we have like one team member who lives in Mexico. We have folks that are on Pacific time, Eastern time, people on our team who have families, who have children. Others are just, solo contributors, I guess. But we're figuring out a lot as we go. And as we continue to scale, that continues to look different. But we have a lot of people who are just passionate about the growth of the company. So it's just kind of naturally, organically happening.
Okay. This leads me into one of my first thought-provoking questions. How can we create environments, both personally and professionally, where admitting a lack of knowledge is seen as a strength rather than a weakness?
Okay. How can we create a culture where asking for help, showing that you don't know everything, is a strength, not a weakness? Honestly, my initial thought goes to like having a common language about that. So I would suggest like starting out with defining what it means to have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And when I say mindset, it's the way that you think about things, the way you process what your thoughts are before they turn into behaviors. So we all have control of our mindset. And if we can help people grow to have more of a growth orientation. So this all came from Carol Dweck. She's a psychologist and was like at the forefront of this term called having a growth mindset. And what it means is to have an orientation towards learning as like challenges and failures aren't real. It's actually, they all are learning opportunities. It's also knowing like you don't know what you don't know, and that's okay. So I'd say, I guess the headline is like recognizing what it means to have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, and just having a little bit of an understanding of when we need our team members to be in a growth mindset. Because if you're thinking about like a fixed mindset, it means like what you're doing is the right way to do it. There's no other options. It's also very ego driven, having like a fixed mindset. It's like if you think back in school when your parents were like, "Oh, Clayton, you're so smart, you're so intelligent." When you tell someone that, it actually like starts to build their ego. It's like, oh, well, if I'm that thing, I can't be other things. And it's almost this label of I always have to show up the most intellectual, the most knowledgeable, but really there's just a lot that everyone can still continue to learn.
Now, how important is that from leadership? Because I've been in roles and I've subjected others to micromanaged type behaviors that looking back, like I wasn't proud of. But I feel like in today's age, we are seeing a shift from more leaders leaning on the teams that they build because they don't know everything.
Yeah, it's a really good call out. So what you're having me think about is this is a framework that I use for leadership development, like coaching. It's called LCP, the Leadership Circle Profile. And they have this framework that shows it's a circle. And on the top of the line, it's your creative competencies. And then on the bottom, it's your reactive tendencies as a leader. And the idea is most leaders, and I think it's like 70 or 80%, it's something crazy. They all lead from a reactive state. And what those reactive states might be, you might be controlling, you might be a high complier, for example. And what's so fascinating is that those sorts of tendencies or preferences are actually what got leaders to the rank that they're in. If you can imagine someone who's controlling, they're just very driven, they're ambitious. They have a tendency to seek out perfectionism. And if you lean too much into that reactive state as a leader, you're assuming a lot, and you're not giving your team an opportunity to show up in a way that leverages their strengths and what they're good at. So I definitely think this shows up a lot in leadership. And what I try to do is I help leaders recognize, like, when you lead from curiosity and with empathy, you can recognize that there's other perspectives and ways of doing things that maybe aren't natural to you, but that doesn't mean that they're wrong. And that in itself is like, it's a lot to sit with. So I'd say like that's step one, empathy and curiosity.
Are we now reaching into like emotional barriers that are preventing people from asking for help?
Yeah. Talk about the topic of psychological safety, and what meaning, like, if you're in a space that is psychologically safe, that means you feel confident and comfortable to bring forward your perspective and not be worried that it's going to be shamed or said it's wrong. So I'd say you need to role model the behavior of, like, I don't have all the answers. I'm interested in hearing what others have to say and actually do something with it. So that's one thing. It's like, you can say that you're a great leader and you're very open to the input of your team members, but if the actions and the behaviors don't align with, I'm getting all this great feedback from Clayton and he's giving me all these great ideas and I'm saying they're awesome, but if I don't actually do something with them, there's a disconnect there. And it's like, you're limiting trust. I'd say is like the headline. It says trust and psychological safety are like key to a successful organization, and it doesn't happen overnight. But you can lose them very quickly. There's a phrase, I don't know who said it, but trust can be gained in drops, but lost in buckets. And that really hit me.
Profound.
Yeah. I'd say there are barriers in the workplace around emotions. If I can give you,
I was going to say, do you see patterns in high performers that you work around? Are they good at doing this in both their personal lives and professional lives? And also, do you see some, high performers professionally kind of struggle at this in their personal lives, whether it be with relationships or self-care?
When you say like struggle with this, what is this that we're talking about?
Recognizing like these emotional barriers that like
do they affect them similarly at work and at home outside of work?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, you're good. I'll say yes. Oftentimes there's patterns where people can't exhibit emotions in the same environment. Sometimes it's like a certain emotion that's really hard for people, whether you're at work or not. I do think, though, and I think it's the United States, I think it's our society and culture. I'm not going to say like the broad nations, but I think of like when we were younger, there were always these like things that our parents would say, especially to boys. So this is, tell me if I'm off though, because obviously I'm a woman, but I grew up with a brother, and I just remember there was this duality of like women had feelings and emotions, but boys, you can't feel. You're not allowed to cry. You have to stay strong. And there's this polar opposite like experience that we're subjected to. And it shows up so much even as we get older, because there's this myth that as humans, there's only certain places where you can be sad, and you're not allowed to show your anger. You're supposed to be happy all of the time. And what drives me nuts is like, that is, even if we're just talking about those three emotions, right? Let's say they're the most broad: happiness, sadness, anger. There's an expectation where we only feel those in certain environments and circumstances. And we're not even supposed to share them unless it's happiness. And that's just limiting the human experience. There's so many emotions to be felt, to be shared. And I think people put a lot of pressure on themselves to not even feel the emotions, let alone manage them. And it creates this block between individuals. Like, you can only get to know someone so much, where you hit this block of vulnerability and like intimacy and like the human connection. And I'm just here to debunk that myth. We need to feel all of the emotions. And I think where people need the most help is just learning how to manage them.
And what I think is important is I think for many years, I even experienced this, but emotions can be actually quite critical in leading you in the right decision making. I'm somebody who maybe relied on logic or so much of the information outside of myself for answers. These people are making these decisions. If I do that, I'll experience the same outcome. Whereas it may not be quite aligned with who I am, who I'm being. And being able to recognize those emotions in you, those emotions are actually giving you hints at maybe what
I was told this, and it's stuck with me for a while. Emotions are energy in motion. Have you ever heard that before?
No, I haven't. I like it.
You can take it and run with it. Yeah, and I love that you're bringing in personality, because that's a lot of the work that I do with individuals is like I use some sort of benchmark assessment for people to understand what their natural preferences are, their personality type. One of the main dimensions that we oftentimes talk about is how do you naturally make a decision? And it's not a, black or white answer. It's oftentimes not that apparent, but we tend to lean either towards that logic driven approach or more of that subjective, more feeler, if you will, approach. And I'd say the most important decisions in our lives, whether you are more logically driven or emotionally driven by decision making, you need to have both. You need to have both for the big decisions in life. So I imagine when you tell me about one of the largest decision that you made and how maybe the logic and the emotion played a part in your decision.
Can I?
Yeah.
I'm glad you actually asked that question. The universe has a way of doing wonderful things. An hour before, pretty much 2 hours ago, I had just put in my resignation for my current job. I signed an offer letter for another job, and I had to let my current job know.
Oh man, This just happened 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I am still I feel a lot of excitement, and I think in some of that excitement is still some nervousness in the sense that am I making the right decision? And I could be going off topic here, but I read a small piece of writing from Kevin Dahlstrom, Camp 4 on Twitter. He puts out golden nuggets all the time, but he briefly discussed that a lot of times the most important decisions you make in life aren't the decisions. It's what happens after the decisions, how you respond to those decisions. And one example he made was, in finding your spouse or partner, 30% of it is finding them. 70% of that is how you
managing
commit to
the
them
relationship. Yeah.
After you actually commit to them. I read that this morning, and I was in a little bit of a predicament because for me, I was treated very well from the company that I just put my notice in, and I would have loved to continue there. There have just been doors that have been open that I felt like my intuition was telling me that I should make the leap. I'm excited to do that. I also was trying to be very mindful of giving the company a good notice, because there's a lot of things happening over the next few weeks that would require me showing up for that and just travel and stuff like that. So it's it was a big timing thing for me. It's I knew I wanted to make the leap. It's just, how do I do this appropriately? Help me rewind though. What was
I had asked you if you had an example. If you had an example of a big momentous event where you had to balance the logic and the emotional side. And I just want to name, I can tell you're still processing this, and for good reason, because this just happened 2 weeks ago. So let this be a space where even if you don't have it all figured out, you can.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I was presented with this opportunity almost towards the end of August, and I went through a couple interviews, and it was the first time I actually had interviews where I felt like I wasn't trying to oversell somebody on me.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah. And it seemed like there was good alignment, a lot of engaging work that would get me excited to wake up every day, solve those problems. So of the indecisiveness that I was probably experiencing was surrounded by the thought of leaving safe and comfortable position that I'm in now. Not saying that the next one won't be safe. It's just all those what ifs,
this is what you know.
What if all these macro conditions end up impacting this leap? What if I don't perform to my expectations? But at the same time, I'm no, it's my confidence that got me here. And if I have any sort of doubt, that's going to be what doesn't work out. So continue to trust in myself and trust in that intuition that told me now is the right time to switch companies, switch cultures. There were a couple other logical decisions or logical pieces of information that, were also centered around this. But yeah, a lot of it was just feeling it.
Very exciting.
Intuition. So that was one significant one recently.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to offer something to you because this is, I'd say, like a newer approach to coaching in a way where like what you just shared with me is you have this, I'll call it like the inner leader. There's this part of you that like knows like it's your confidence. There's this like opportunity just feels right. And you can go after it even though you don't have all the answers. And it's just like this voice in you that's really building you up and like is confirming and validating like this is a great opportunity for you. At the same time, though, there's this other voice, we'll call it our inner critic, who is saying all the things that could go wrong, has all the what ifs. And what I want to offer you is don't quiet that right away. There's probably some insight and wisdom in there. So I encourage you to like ask your inner critic, like, what are you trying to tell me? What's important for me to know?
Wow.
As opposed to just setting it aside, because there's some probably good nuggets in there that can support your inner leader along the way.
I'll have to do a little bit of writing on that.
I know you love to, so
a little bit more. Yeah.
And
what about you?
You're going to Montana, so you have some time for
I do. I think
journaling.
This is going to be a nice. Whenever I change environments, even if I love traveling, but sometimes I get a little complacent, and it's like, no, I'm getting things done here. Now it's not the right time to travel. But the moment I hop on that airplane, the frame of mind just shifts to this this sponge of willing to absorb new information, or new ideas, new inspirations. Yeah. New creativity. So I don't know what will happen over the next 10 days in Montana. I will have to work a little bit to finish out some of my responsibilities, but hoping to get just a refresh.
Yeah.
Of brainwaves.
Very well deserved. Do you know Nicole, what's your zodiac sign? Let me ask that really quick.
I like it. Do you only want my sun sign?
You want to give me sun and moon? I want to know, like, are you earth, air, fire?
I am primarily, like, my entire zodiac is primarily fire and water. My sun and rising are fire. My sun is a Leo, and I've been totally embracing a lot more of my Leo characteristics lately.
Nice.
My rising is in Aries. That's the...
Remind me what rising is. What is that?
Rising is like the personality and behavior that like you...
Other people see.
Yeah. And the way you express yourself to other people and the world around you.
Yes. Okay.
And so like the Aries in me is sometimes the person who like is good at starting things, and then my energy level dies out halfway through starting it. And I'm like, all right, I need something else to start. And, the Leo in me is the person who loves to be in front of this camera, loves to be in front of the mic, loves to be creating content, not even necessarily for it to be viewed, but like, it's just that personality that I get to bring out. And then my moon is a Pisces moon. So that is what makes me feel what other people are going through, even when I'm not necessarily even communicating with them. So yeah, I'm sure there's so much more. I'm not an astrologist.
And I'm just like, me neither. I'm just like getting a taste of it. So many people know everything about their sign, and then the next step is knowing about other people's signs. So I'm in that phase. So. Is your birthday? Yeah, not by much though.
I feel like you're an Aries too.
I am an Aries.
Like an Aries sun. Yeah. I feel like I noted that this year when I saw your birthday. She's an Aries.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. An honor and a privilege to be passionate, determined, animated. I wear those colors strong.
I see it. What I think is so cool about astrology is just like any other personality test we were kind of talking about. I've taken quite a few up to this point. The DISC assessment, the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, Culture Index. Do you do the Culture Index at all?
I haven't done that before. No.
I think they're just all good pieces of information that describe possibilities or behaviors that could be attached to you at certain times of your life that you could just use to know more about you. I wouldn't say you need to necessarily attach them to your identity, but they could just be behaviors or I don't even know what another term is.
I use the words preferences, tendencies.
Yeah, tendencies that show up
Yep.
that, oh, if you're aware of them now, it's not like that tendency is good or bad, but you at least have some sort of idea and awareness on maybe how to respond to that tendency
You got it.
in
I
whatever
love that you called
environment.
it, and you brought up awareness. Like, I think we get so tied to it being this assessment tool and it's this evaluation tool when really they're an awareness tool or tool. And it's just a starting point for people. And I think, to your point, the expectation is not for people to put all their eggs in one basket. It's you're just using this as a little bit more understanding of yourself, and it's not rigid. Like, I see a lot of times with teams who are given this new personality assessment, and it just resonates with them so much. And all of a sudden it becomes tied to their identity. And like, I don't like structure, and I'm not really time bound. I'm not good at like meeting deadlines. And that's just how my personality type is. And then they kind of use it as a crutch or an excuse. And I will say, little tidbit is I like to help people recognize when things are explanations, not excuses, because those are very different. But sometimes in the personality
Mm.
realm, people like to use their type as an excuse to why they can't do X, Y, or Z, or they're not good at X, Y, or Z. And I help push them to maybe you're just not good at it yet. And just because maybe it's not a weakness, but it's a growth area. So just that terminology helps them bring in this more growth oriented mindset. So it's not as fixed as personality assessments might make it.
By chance, Nicole, is there an example you can use from your life or maybe a situation recently that like highlights the difference between explanation and example, if you have
A
one?
good question. I have a really good one. Oh, I'm going to try to headline this. Know that like for the past 10 years, I've been going through my own growth journey around having ADHD, but not wanting to be on like a stimulant based medication, which I was on for 10 years. So you can imagine there's like a lot of learnings, a lot of relearning going on through that process. And one of the things that this is actually very fascinating. One of the things that I've noticed that still shows up for me that's really hard to get around is when I'm in a environment and there's a lot of stimulus. So let's say like I'm in a loud bar, but it's just you and I there. And as much as like I'm good at one-on-one conversation and how much like I just want to be like enveloped, how much I want to be just like here with you, right? If the sounds around me are so loud, my attention fixates on those louder stimuli as much as I want to be here with you. And I found myself like in whether it's a concert, whether it's a bar or even a baseball game, if I'm like somewhere in that space where all of these stimuli are too loud, I'll ask whoever I'm with if like we can move where we're sitting. Or we walk into a restaurant, I'm instantly figuring out what is the best seat in the house for me to sit at. And for a while, Clayton, I thought this was like the perfectionist in me trying to find the best place. But then I like through conversation with my therapist, she's like, no, actually, Nicole, I think what you're doing is you're doing this light analysis because you want to be engaged and as present as you can with the person that you're experiencing whatever it is with. So what you're trying to do is put yourself in a situation where you are comfortable, where you can be authentic and genuine, and overstimulus just doesn't do it for me. And that was just like this crazy breakthrough. I'm like, maybe that is a little bit of my perfectionism telling me some like new insights. And I'll say that that is an example of like, it's an explanation why I might look like I'm particular or trying to find the perfect option, but it's not an excuse. It's more of an explanation.
I see. That's actually a really good example. It makes me think of like
Thank you.
certain
It's fresh.
situations in my life where
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they're excuses or explanations, but I'm going to go a little bit deeper. I feel like this is a good entry point into cell phone usage, text messages, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm somebody who, I don't know, sometimes like I just won't look at text messages because the environment I'm in is preventing me from like giving all the concentration that I want to give to a certain
Yeah.
conversation.
Yep.
I don't know. Does that happen with you?
All the time. I have ways that I've managed it. If you're interested in knowing, I've turned off all my notifications except for maybe phone calls. So like email, and by notifications I mean the badges on your phone. So when it says like you have 5 messages. I have all of those turned off. So I'll see like when a text message comes in, but I don't have that number yelling at me all the time.
You don't have the red number in the side of the...
Yeah, that was an unlock. But I'm so with you. It's like, I want to be present for this conversation. And if I'm out with people, I can't do both. And I've learned that we put a lot of pressure to be in all of these places all at once. And we have to be available for people all of the time because technology has just made it that much easier to do so. But really, I mean, if you told me, hey, Nicole, I didn't get back to you until the morning after because I was out doing X, Y, and Z, like, I would rather you wait to text me back when you are present and available as opposed to just like crossing it off the list like you got it done. And I think you and I are similar in that way.
Like,
yeah.
Thumbs up.
Totally. Yeah, that resonates.
Staying on this topic, I do think there's probably a difference too in text messaging when it comes to generational gaps.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we were on there when we discussed this, but you are a millennial, correct?
I am.
You are a millennial. I don't know what to define myself as. Maybe I'm undefinable, but I know they say the millennial and Gen Z cutoff year is 1995. I was born in the middle of 1995. I sometimes recognize certain tendencies that float me towards millennial and then certain tendencies that float me towards
both
Gen
are probably
Z,
true. Yeah.
Yeah. But
gosh.
For example,
even just you saying like millennial versus Gen Z, like it brings me a lot of things to unpack, but continue.
And don't we have something also after Gen Z, like people born after, I don't even know what it's called.
Yeah, I don't remember what it's called either.
But for me, like there are some times where I'll be texting or sending an email and I'm just like direct to the point. Smart Brevity. I don't know if you ever read that book.
Mm-mm.
Smart Brevity is like using the cleanest, most direct, precise type of communication rather than saying, I need you to get this work done immediately after you finish up this task. Just be like, do this task. And it was a book, Smart Brevity's book, written by a couple of journalists. Sometimes I find myself in that sort of headspace, whereas in the other type of headspace, I'm trying to actually maybe find some ways to connect emotionally with the other person and be a little bit more sincere in my communications.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that is a generational difference. What would you say? Do you see generational differences in the way people communicate via text message?
I think generations aside, I think it's a communication style and preference, and that can look the same across generations. So I want to like set generational differences aside for a second and talk about like the two things you're describing. One is, and I resonate with both. So sometimes you need to be direct. Brene Brown says, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And I so stand behind that. Do I believe that being direct, the most concise, is the best form of communication in all aspects? No, it sounds so disingenuous. Like
I'm sure there's a difference between direct and demand.
When to use them. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that's
go
true.
ahead though.
And then the other piece around like with texting, I have a hard time. I don't even think it's a me thing. This is like it's a hot take. It's a hot perspective that anything that is supposed to be like intimate or very like deep can't be shared via text because communication requires a lot of nonverbal and verbal cues for it to be a true like connection and understanding. I think it's like 80%. Sometimes I throw percentages out and I'm pretty sure they're accurate, but you can check me. But it's really high. Maybe 90% of our communication is nonverbal as humans. So you're telling me when we're texting, it might be 70 or 80, but it's well beyond 50%.
I mean, 100 years ago, that had to be like 99% in the other direction.
Being verbal.
Crazy. Yeah.
Never thought of it like that. But yeah, it's crazy because texting removes all of the nonverbal cues and a lot of the verbal cues. You can't read tone. I can say a message that says, Clayton, I need to talk to you. And I'm meaning it as like, Clayton, I need to talk to you. You might read it as, Clayton, I need to talk to you. And that there's already miscommunication there. There are different perceptions of the same statement. You don't know the sentiment that comes with it. And it just goes down the drain with texting. So for me, texting is probably my last resort type of form of communication. Hot take.
Do you think so? Would you say texting communication is overused as a society?
Oh yeah. People love efficiency. Texting, it's literally at our fingertips. So why wouldn't we use it? There's a time and place for texting, and it's being overused in areas which it shouldn't. No
I
one
mean,
should.
I'm sure in the workplace there's efficiency in having these technologies, but as always, they come at a cost in some other area of life.
They do. They do. And I'll say a form of communication that I use so much at work and outside of work are voice memos. And I feel like Gen Z might be more on the voice memo train. So I'm just ready to ride it with them, with you, because you get all of the nuance to communication through voice memos. And it's more of you can connect with someone's human experience through voice memos better than text messaging. Do I think everything needs to be a voice memo? No. But the things that matter, when tone matters, when, perception really matters, and it's not us talking about logistics, for example, like I think the logistics, those can
Totally.
stay in a text for
Yeah.
sure. But for the richness, for creativity, for like deeper connection, texting just doesn't do it. And I think voice memos do. Hot take.
I'm going to be much more mindful of that, even in a professional setting. I definitely don't think I send enough voice memos, and I do send voice memos, but I don't know. I think you're onto something there that I need to be a little bit more mindful about.
Maybe just more, just start in the awareness phase. No expectation for you to dive on in head deep into voice memos. If you find yourself having conversations in text that you believe they aren't getting the depth or the clarity that you seek out, try a different method. And my hope is that those on the receiving end will appreciate it.
I actually wouldn't mind rewinding a little bit back before we talked about texting. You were mentioning explanation and excuses.
Okay.
A question I thought about then was, do you ever feel pressure canceling on commitments you've made because you don't want to let down the other party, whereas it's actually okay for you to have an excuse to cancel that commitment because maybe that reason why you're canceling is a little bit more important. I don't know if I worded that the best way.
I get you're asking do I ever feel guilty when I cancel plans because what I'm doing instead actually warrants like a better outcome use of time.
And I asked this because I thought about this at that time where sometimes I go deep into my head because I am somebody who when I even put the verbal announcement out there, oh yeah, we're going to get together this date and maybe we don't follow up. It's still in the back of my head that I have this commitment coming, and I don't know if they're as strong to the commitment as I am, but it's very difficult for me to not commit once I put it out on paper in air. So I'm curious if you are similar.
Yeah.
How you deal with that.
Do you know your Myers-Briggs 4-letter type offhand?
EMFJ.
ENFJ. Yeah, that makes sense.
I will have to confirm with you after, but
knowing what I know about you, that resonates. So what you're describing is the J in you who really likes closure. So for me, that and I'll give you my answer. And yes, I experience it too, and we have different personality types. But that last dimension of Myers-Briggs is all around our inclination towards structure. How do we like to organize our days? I'm a perceiver, which means I like to kind of go with the flow. I'm more of a spontaneous person. I like to keep things open-ended. Rarely like to make decisions. I like just having options and never deciding on things. Is that a fault at times? Absolutely. But where your gift and strength is as a judger, it doesn't mean you're judgmental, but you have an inclination towards structure, towards closure. So you get a lot of energy when things are followed through on in some regards. So I think what's happening is your tendency to push towards closure is at ends when you have something that you've put out into the world is this is going to happen and then it doesn't follow through. So my answer is you're a very self-aware person, so you notice that. 2, there's a lot of people who aren't worried about it as much as you, but there are still people who are. That helps. From my vantage point, yes, that's something I think I've gotten better at over time, not feeling guilty when I need to shift things. And I'll say when I can provide an explanation, it's not an excuse. If I can provide the explanation for why I need to say no to this thing, it's because it's allowing me to say yes to this other thing. Most of the time, the person on the receiving end is understanding. Is it becoming a pattern where I'm starting to prioritize all of these other things over my relationship with these people? That's happening. then that's an issue. But if it's every so often and I do a really good job at coming back to this person and saying, okay, I know this isn't going to work this time, this day, but I'd love to offer other options that could work for you. I think closing the loop in that way would serve you really well. And people are understanding. Things come up. Opportunities arise, you know?
I almost sent you a message early yesterday morning saying, hey, I may need to push this conversation back until I get back from Montana because things have just been adding up that I thought could be better to address before I go. And I got to admit,
How are
I'm
you
so
feeling
glad I
right
did.
now sitting here?
So grateful that I committed. I think I did know I was going to commit, but there was just that voice in me that said, you know, you can take care of these chores, responsibilities that like I wasn't really expecting that have just come across my way over the week, work related, non-work related, and giving
Power of the pause.
kind of giving myself a little bit space to like deal with all of them rather than having like a very tight schedule up to my flight tomorrow morning. So
yeah.
But I'm glad we're here showing up, talking about all these things.
Ditto. What else you got? What else do you want to talk about?
Good question. What I got here. Okay, here is a topic we could find some channels to navigate through. How has social media influenced the way that we express our emotions? And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's enough of a thing to unpack. How has social media affected how we express our emotions? Well, we only show the good ones on social media. Unless that's not true. I've been seeing more of this shift where people are being more vulnerable and, you know, finding community and connection through very like sad things. Like, you know, when a person passes away and you share that on Instagram, it's not to get the likes and the love or the, you know, the true like love, like symbol, you know, it's more of sharing this with your community and the receiving of like this moment and knowing that someone's holding space for you and that they're understanding as much as they can of what you're going through. It's almost like seeking, I don't know if it's seeking empathy, but there are ways to connect with people through things that they might have a shared experience in. But I think oftentimes social media, and I kind of, when I think of social media, I go pretty much just to Instagram because I'm not on Twitter, Facebook, the others. So I'm very limited there, but I think Instagram seeks out, you know, it's content that gives you a dopamine rush. And that's what it's there for in a way.
I have a push-pull relationship with Instagram with the understanding of like what it does to my brain via dopamine. You know, there are so many positive things that I receive from it and good information, but at the same time, there's just so much nonsense that I feel like I don't know if it's outweighing the benefits that I receive from it. I always struggle with that. It's something that I haven't taken a long pause on in a while, and maybe it's needed. But at the same time, like there are moments from people's lives who I care about, like you, other Nicole, and just friends and family who I'm like, wow, I like seeing that from them. But
yeah, I'll say it took me a bit of time and intentional reflection on like, okay, if I found balance, if I didn't want to get rid of it all the way, like what is balance to me? What does that look like? So I have a very curated Instagram where there's only, let's say maybe 30 to 40 people that I have not muted, which begs the question, well, then why do I have all of these followers if I'm only looking at 30 to 40? But I've found that I'm only spending maybe 10 minutes a day on Instagram. And if I'm going to spend 10 minutes, I want it to be viewing the people that mean the most to me and that I want to have updates on. So I found that to be very helpful.
Wow. I did not even ever try to do that. I didn't know I could mute people. Yeah.
Yeah, you can mute them through, and I think it gives you a choice. You can mute them through your feed or the story. So that's a great tool. I highly recommend that. And then I don't know, I also, you know, all the algorithms and shit that's in Instagram and everything. But I've found that like my like discovery page on Instagram is so lovely. I mean, it's all animal based. It's like these videos of people like saving wildlife. So I'm getting like a lot of like dopamine just from watching videos and content of things that like I wouldn't have exposure to otherwise. I do recognize though a lot of my feed is like the good stuff when at the same time, you know, whether it's politics, whether what's going on in Gaza, like my feed doesn't really show me the other elements of what's going on in the world. And that's like another topic. It's like I want to be informed, but I don't want to have content that has me in Gaza with people experiencing what they are. And I think that is something that as a race, as a generate, or just everyone who's alive right now, we're experiencing like so much exposure to things in the world that we didn't have exposure to before. And it's almost like there's this expectation that you should be able to watch a very sad video of something going on in the completely opposite side of the world and then get on the train, or you're sitting on the train and watching this, terrible disaster, and then you're supposed to go about your day and just keep scrolling. Like it's almost like numbing the human experience in that way because it's at our fingertips. Do we really have the emotional capacity to watch this, to empathize with it, or are you just looking at it to be informed and that's enough? It's something I'm like still wrapping my head around. Something we're not talking about though as a culture, how we have exposure to more hate, more violence in the world than we've ever had. Like, it's at our fingertips, literally.
Do you think that as a society we're labeling others too much based on their political opinions, or we're identifying people with their political opinions too aggressively? Or does that say something about who that person is? For example,
I mean, as people, we love labels. There's validation in having labels. Sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not. I think politically, and I don't get too deep into politics, so I'm going to give you my headline is, I think if we're just going to name Republicans versus Democrats, I think we're now at a time where we might not resonate with the leader of our party. And we have to more so focus on what does that party stand for, to recognize like if that means a shift in which party I lean toward, that's okay. But I think there is this divide where I don't know, I feel like there's not much middle ground between it. And people have a hard time like saying like, oh, I actually resonate with this person's views, even though I don't label myself as that party.
I agree.
And I think there's an ego thing going on too with labels and stuff. So it's another episode to unpack, I might say.
That's as far into politics as I want to go.
It's a good question, though.
Well,
An hour's gone by. Can you believe it?
I know. I want to keep talking, but I also think like we covered some good stuff.
We covered some good ground.
If we want to cover more, we should definitely do this again.
I would love to. It would be an honor to be out here again.
Yeah. Is there any other things that you would like to voice into this ether of a podcast before you take on your weekend in Chicago?
This is just coming up for me right now, is that we're never going to be this young. We're not getting younger. So whatever ideas or things that you think you might want to pursue, just try it, because 1 is greater than 0. And acronym I want to leave everyone with is the acronym of FEAR, because what fear actually is false evidence appearing real.
Say that again.
False evidence appearing real is what fear is. And emotions, they're just energy and motion. And humans have both. Humans have fear. Humans have emotions. Start with acknowledging that and then seeing what you want to do with it and how you want to just be in the world. I think people oftentimes think that life is so fixed and we're supposed to be a certain way, or this is how I've always been, so this is who I am today. Everything's changing. You and I have talked about this. Nothing is permanent. And your mindset, the behaviors that you take on, that is so much in your control. And once people can start realizing what's in their control versus what is out of their control, life gets a hell of a lot easier and more fun and more exciting. And that's what I'll leave the people with.
Got a couple lightning questions for you that are just coming off the head.
Yeah.
What is the nicest thing that a non-family member has ever done for you?
There's probably a lot of answers to this, but the first thing that's coming to mind, because I'm planning to run my second half marathon in 2 months.
Let's go.
In London.
Wild. In London? What?
In London. I know.
Is it just you? Are you going with a group? Going with anybody?
Just me. So I'll put
inspiring.
this out to you, and I'm also going to just tell my community, like, one of the things that gets me going while I run are voice memos. So like if you send me a voice memo while I'm running, I'll hear it through my AirPods. So knowing that I'm not going to have anyone there with me, like I'm just hoping for all of these little inputs of just niceties and, whatever, throughout my race. So I'll give you the exact
have to promise. Yeah, I was going to say you have to promise me that
Yeah.
you'll send me the time.
I will.
that you're
I
at.
will for sure. So
So go
my
ahead.
answer is I think about the people who showed up for my first half marathon. Because I'm someone like if I want to do something, I don't really need a community to do it with, but how much more benefit and just like richness it brings when you have people on the sidelines there rooting for you. And I'd say like that was a really nice thing from seeing like a few people that weren't my closest friends, but they were there. That was a nice thing. That's what comes to mind.
Question.
Mhm.
If you had to describe your being
Uh-huh.
in one word, what
One
word?
word.
One word.
Eating in one word. I'm going to say passionate.
I like it.
I got a lot of love for things, small and large, and I just get excited about a lot. So passionate, I feel like encompasses a good chunk of.
One cool thing that I actually took away from the company I work for now is at the beginning of each year, my director had asked us to set a one-word intention for that year. And mine at the beginning of this year was create. So I've been embracing that the entire year.
You sure have.
I feel like coming to life, but passionate. I
Yeah.
so see that in your energy. It's a good one.
Thank
Yeah. Well, that's it. 2 questions, 2 lightning questions.
Great.
That's all I
I
got.
passed. Awesome.
This was phenomenal, Nicole. Thank you for being a part of this experience of making insight. I don't know what's
Thank you for
next,
holding the
but
space.
you're welcome.
We'll figure it out together.
We will.